I'm Hans Öström from the Swedish delegation here to UNESCO and OECD. And thank you for your very inspiring and interesting presentations, all of you. I have two questions. The first one about the YMP. I think you mentioned that sometimes it's difficult to integrate your program in local and national curricula. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that? What's the nature of these problems and how difficult it is? And do you have difficulty in certain states or in more centralized systems? It would, I would think that it would be easier in more decentralized systems. But if you could tell me a little bit more about that. And to Mr. Leadbeater, I think you made your case very convincingly. But on the other hand, you must realize that all the best performing countries in terms of school systems, as measured by OECD and other international organizations, are the traditional ones, like Finland, like Singapore and these countries, very much doing the way that we have experienced from many years. So it still would be difficult. There's so many countries that try to copy what they're doing. And not at least the United States, I discovered that they're trying to, they have visited countries like Finland and Singapore, and they're trying really to copy it more or less what they're doing. So it would be difficult to make this case and to really change systems. These are my two questions. Thank you.
Well, the experience with local curricula is that I think it has all to do with a mind shift among teachers and school leaders, because they are used to have a learning material that is created in order to be in line with the curriculum of that country or the local curricula. And here comes a learning material that is global. It's the same for all students in all countries. And once they realize that it's really hard for us to adapt to all different local curricula, they also realize that it has to be the other way around. This is like a starting point for a discussion. And you need to work with this learning material and see how it could fit in with the local curricula. And typically this happens when we have an engaged teacher that has been working with it for 1 year or 2 years, and they realize that very many things that they address during the YMP sessions are also addressed, but also addressed in the regular teaching. And so they start to compare the course plan and the YMP, and they see that, okay, this part fits in here and fits in here, and all of a sudden you can see that if you take the YMP, it means that you should have a number of credits for doing so, and then you're a part of so they find ways to integrate it into the local curriculum, but it's really hard for us to safeguard that the program is adapted to more than 200 national curriculums around the world. But what we do is that we have this scientific background information, and we have a starting point for discussions, and then the teachers and the school leaders will take it from there. And it works so far. So you have the option to take the course on the side of the regular schoolwork, or write a course plan where this is integrated. And then I have local examples I can provide to you after the session.
Okay, Mr. Leadbeater, the second question.
Yeah. Well, I would love to be educating my children in Finland or Denmark. I'm not so sure that I would like them to be educated in South Korea. But certainly Finland, I think, has an outstanding system. So I'm not saying don't learn from them. I'm saying that it's important what you learn, that it's very difficult to copy them because there's so much that socially and politically surrounds those systems. It's very difficult to copy. They're quite high cost. I mean, they require quite a lot in terms of teacher training, development, schools, infrastructure, which is quite difficult to mimic. I think it's important that when we look at them, we understand, if you like, their underlying principles, not just their operating practices. And one of the most important underlying principles in Finnish education seems to me about the importance of the discretion and capability of the teacher to vary how something is learned, what is learned, and to adapt to different needs. As well as, of course, the relationship between the education system and the welfare system and the role of families in all of that. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that all those systems, certainly Singapore, Finland, think that they have their own weaknesses and that there are things that they're very good at, but there are other things that they worry they're not very good at, or they're not as good as they should be, and that some of those things might involve, if you like, broadly sort of critical thinking, problem solving and creativity, broadly speaking, and so that they aren't the perfect answer. And I'm always reminded, this is a rather crude analogy, but you know, when the Australians and the Californians decided to create a wine industry, they certainly went to look in Bordeaux and they learnt, but they didn't try and copy it, because then we'd have just ended up with another Bordeaux serving relatively small amounts of wine to relatively small numbers of people. The fact that wine is drunk all over the world because it's Australian and Californian is because they set out to do something different. And what they set out to do was to persuade people who don't drink wine that they should drink wine. They set out basically to persuade people who drank Coke, coffee, beer and bourbon that they should drink wine. And our challenge is not to persuade people who already drink wine that they should drink a different kind of wine or a better kind of wine. In other words, our challenge is not to persuade the already educated that they need a different kind of education. Our challenge is to get education to people who can't afford the way that we currently do it, or it's not relevant, or it's not powerful enough. That's our challenge. It's much more like the Australian or the Californian challenge. And to think like that, you need to both borrow elements of that historic wisdom and knowledge, but combine it with some completely different way of thinking about how you make it possible. And then you can get to completely new kinds of solutions which might operate at high quality, mass scale and affordable price. And I think that's basically the challenge of global education.
Thank you, Mr. Leadbeater. Do you have any other questions from the floor? Yes, please.
Sorry to take the floor again, but the last remark from Mr. Leadbeater made me think of this very striking statement that education plus technology creates hope. And I think some of the traditional reservations to these initiatives, which I find extremely important and very inspiring, is that it's elitist. It's for the rich countries, for those who have access to computers, and so on. And then you mentioned actually in your presentation the mobile telephones, that in this instance the technology could be represented by this pretty low-tech mobile phone. Do you have any in your surveys, any good examples of how mobile phones have been used for educational purposes in a more communicative, systematic way, as the Young Masters program represent? Thank you.
Well, two things. One is that I think we're only just starting, and I think one of the biggest, a big issue is how that sort of whole mobile connectivity gets married to social purpose, not just commercial purpose. And the history of the mobile phone is different from the history of the computer. And the computer has these very important open source kind of elements to its history and culture, which I'm not sure the mobile phone has in quite the same kind of way. And I think we're just beginning to see the potential applications. But I am a trustee of an organization called CDI, which is the Center for Digital Inclusion based in Brazil, which Rodrigo Baggio started by taking computers into favelas. And when we took the program into the UK, we found that actually it was smartphones that were most appealing, powerful and attractive platforms that young people wanted to kind of work around. And so I do think that there is some huge potential in all of that that we should be taking. But the only other thing that I would say is I'm also struck that going around, when I said education plus technology equals hope, I do think that the technology is often the web or computers or things like that. But I also saw people using all kinds of technologies that brought hope in a way. So one of the most powerful, of course, is El Sistema, which uses the violin as a technology, really. It's a sort of technology for learning. So one of the things I would recommend is that we don't impose ideas of what really relevant technologies are, that actually they can be quite locally adaptive, those ideas of what a relevant technology is. And I suspect in this Sustainable Development Programme, actually one of the things is people discovering local technologies with the help of this programme that help them solve local problems, whether they're of pollution or recycling or what have you. A lot of the technological creativity will have to be quite localised as well as global.
Yeah, I would like to connect to what Mr. Leadbeater is saying there, that if we connect to the picture he showed us, I would say that the Young Masters program is exactly that kind of structure. It's a system. And the technology is just a vehicle to bring the system to its user. And then you need to be adaptive and know your end user. If you're in Africa, mobile phones are perhaps the best way to come all the way out to the users you want to reach out to. So you need to be creative and find a way to bring the system through that vehicle. It's as simple as that. So I think that we have learned that the hard way, that in the early days we sent out CD-ROMs with mail all over the world, and we had students going to internet cafes and bringing in their assignments for during a session there. They didn't have computers at all in some of the groups. So we also made the content available as PDFs. They could print it out and have a group session at a local school. So you have to have a resilient and also very pragmatic technological approach, I think, and just take the road that takes you to the user, and be creative and use the possibilities that you find down that road.